I may have made a giant mistake. Let me tell you about the 7 things I regret the most about moving to Georgia. One thing that I wish I had known about before moving to Georgia is that many of the houses here in Georgia and in the metro Atlanta area have deferred maintenance. It's so common for people just to not really keep up with their homes here. It's like so many houses have roofs that are 20 years old or original to the home, or HVAC systems that are 20 years old, hot water heaters that are like about to explode because they're on their last leg. Man, it is like so common to see these problems with so many of the homes here. Like, how do we still have carpet in the living room in houses in 2023? How have we not gotten past that? But these are the kinds of things that we see all the time in so many of the homes here in Metro Atlanta. And I wish I would have known that so many of the houses have these kinds of issues that are like not being taken care of, or homes that are not being modernized. And I think one of the reasons why we have so many homes with these kinds of problems is that the average home value here in Metro Atlanta and in Georgia is so low that it's just not very common for people to invest a lot of money into their home. Like in other parts of the country, maybe you would put 20, 30, or $40,000 into renovating a home after 20 years or so to make it more modern. But here in Georgia, it's not common to get that return on investment back because the average home values here are so low. So for many people, it's just not worth putting $20,000 into new flooring of their home, or $30,000 to $40,000 into a new roof of their home if they're not going to see that return on investment. You know, like if you put that much money into the home, you would expect to see that the home value would go up. But for so many homes here, the home values don't go up by the amount that you invest into it. So for that reason, you see these kinds of deferred maintenance problems very commonly here in Georgia. Another reason that I sometimes regret living here is that the infrastructure here in Georgia is terrible. Of course, if you're thinking about still moving to Atlanta or any of the suburbs after watching this video about how Georgia sucks, then feel free to call or text or email me anytime. Thank you so much to everybody who has reached out. I really am always happy to help, but the infrastructure here in Georgia is like, sometimes it is just the worst. Like you would think in 2023, all houses would have high-speed internet. All the areas you would think have high-speed internet, but they don't all have high-speed internet. Like if you're going to buy a home here in Georgia, you have to like check on the website, like does AT&T or Comcast or whatever service that neighborhood for high-speed fiber internet, because they don't all do that. Or like another common problem is the power lines here in Metro Atlanta. Like the power lines are on poles that look like they're from 40 years ago, and they look like they're about to fall over. And sometimes they do fall over because of storms, or maybe it's ice in the wintertime that kind of breaks down the power lines and causes power outages all over certain cities. And so this is super common, and it just has to do with the terrible infrastructure that we have here in Metro Atlanta. Another good example of the terrible infrastructure is like, we don't really get a lot of snow here in Georgia, but what we do get is a lot of ice, because very often in the winter times, we get an average temperature of right around the freezing temperature. So in the afternoon, it will be 40 degrees or so. And then in the evenings, it will be below freezing, maybe like, 20 or 30 degrees in the evening. So if it rains in the wintertime in the afternoon, all of that water on the streets becomes ice by the evening time, which for many cities around the country is not really a problem because they have things like salt trucks or sand trucks to put all over the roads to treat the roads for the drivers. Not here in Georgia. Sometimes they have that, but not all the time. So in the wintertime, if it rains and it gets below freezing time in the evening, you have to be super careful of ice on the roads here in Metro Atlanta. And so many people just avoid driving during the days where the weatherman says it's going to snow or there's going to be ice. people will just be like, I'm not leaving the house. And that is, a product of just the terrible infrastructure that we have here. Another reason why I sometimes regret living here is that the public school system here in Metro Atlanta is not very good. You would think that in like a major city like Atlanta, that the schools would be equally good, but they're not. I mean, so many of the cities and suburbs around Atlanta and the public schools in the city of Atlanta are just garbage. Like greatschools.org will very often rate those schools a 4 out of 10 or a 5 out of 10. And that's super common for many of the suburbs around Atlanta. And as a parent myself, it is super disappointing to see so many of the public schools with terrible ratings. So that's certainly something that I regret about living in Georgia. And then another one is the heat and the humidity that we have here in Georgia. As someone who comes from the state of Florida, from Miami, I was thinking like when we come to Georgia, it's not going to be hot. Like they have all 4 seasons in Georgia. We're going to see a lot of like snow, and the weather and the temperature is going to be much cooler than South Florida. But man, the temperature here in the summertime is awful. 95 to 100 degrees with like 1,000,000% humidity. And it is just a sauna here in the summertime. Very often, I won't even go outside during the summertime afternoons because it's just so bad. Or like if you park your car in a parking lot and you get back to the car in the afternoon in the summertime, you should just expect the inside of your car to be incredibly hot until you start that AC up. Like it is so bad, the temperature here in the summertime. And then in the wintertime, yeah, it does get cold, and we do see some snow here, but the thing is that the humidity stays during the wintertime. It's not a dry cold like in certain parts of the country. It's like a humid cold, which just makes for these bitterly cold days. Like you feel that moisture in the air during the wintertime, and it's like 20 degrees, and that kind of cold absolutely sucks. So in the summertime, the temperature sucks. In the wintertime, the temperature sucks. So I just want you to know, like, if you're planning on moving here to Georgia, 9 months out of the year, the weather is great, but 3 months out of the year, it is unbearable. And the fifth thing that I really regret about moving to Georgia is that it's like living in the past here in Georgia. Like when I go to other parts of the country, Miami or California or New York, to me, it feels like going to the future. And so you should know that many times when I work with people who come here to Georgia from California, to them, it's like going to the past. It's like they transported 20 years back and they're like experiencing what it was like living 20 years ago. And so that is just such a common feedback that I get from many people. And I certainly see that when I'm living here in Georgia, like so many of the buildings, so many of the building codes, the home buying process, the businesses, it's like they are from the past. And I guess that just has to do with the way that the economy has developed here in Georgia in the last 20 or 30 years. But man, it is just terrible. And again, that has to do with the infrastructure as well. The slow internet, the power lines that sometimes cause power outages, all of these things come together to create this feeling of it's like you're living 20 or 30 years ago. And that's what it's like to live in Georgia very often, especially if you're in one of the suburbs that's far from the city of Atlanta. Like if you're in South Georgia, it's like living 40 years ago, but here in Metro Atlanta, it's still like living in the past. So certainly something to think about if you plan on moving to Georgia. And then without question, another one that I really regret about moving to Georgia is the allergy season that we have here in Georgia. Like during the springtime, every single green thing that we have here in Georgia is in bloom and creates allergy problems for so many people, including myself. Like during allergy season, which is now during the spring, I am constantly on some kind of allergy medicine or like multiple allergy medicines that I take every day to try to combat the sneezing and like the watery eyes and the itchy eyes. Like it is so bad here in Georgia. And again, part of that has to do with just how much trees and nature we have here in Georgia. And while all of that is cool and like during the summertime and the fall, it's great. During allergy season, all of those things are in bloom. And one of the worst ones is the pollen. And the pollen comes from the pine trees. And we have pine trees here everywhere. So that pollen is one of the worst things about the allergy season. And like the pollen coats everything. Like around April or May, the pollen will cover the streets, it will cover the cars, the sidewalks, the roofs of people's houses. And like you see this yellow film everywhere. And that is one of the biggest causes of the allergy problems for many people here in Georgia. And then another one that I definitely regret about living here in Georgia is that, like, you would think Georgia has a lot of small towns in them with not a lot of people, but the truth is that there are a ton of people here in Georgia, 5 million people living in the metro Atlanta area, which causes a lot of traffic. The traffic is terrible here. There are certainly a lot of bads about living in Georgia, but there's also a lot of goods about living here in Georgia. If you want a complete list of the pros and cons of living in Metro Atlanta, check out this video. I'll see you there.